The bullet missed Lucas Donovan by less than an inch, close enough that he felt the heat of it against his cheek as he dove behind the water trough outside the general store in Lone Pine, Arizona Territory. It was June of 1878, and the scorching sun beat down on the dusty street as another shot rang out, splintering the wood above his head. Lucas pressed his back against the rough planks, his heart hammering as he tried to figure out which direction the shots were coming from. He was a ranch hand, not a gunfighter, and whoever was shooting at him clearly had him mistaken for someone else. "Stop shooting, damn it," Lucas yelled, his voice hoarse from the dry heat. "I ain't who you think I am." Another bullet answered him, this one punching through the metal trough and sending water streaming onto the packed earth. Lucas scrambled to his left, keeping low, and made a desperate run for the narrow alley between the mercantile and the saloon. His boots kicked up dust as he sprinted, expecting to feel a bullet between his shoulder blades at any moment. He made it to the alley and kept running, not stopping until he was well past the edge of town and heading into the rocky hills beyond. The shooting stopped, but Lucas kept moving. He had no horse, no supplies, just the clothes on his back and the few dollars in his pocket. His horse was back at the stable, his bedroll and supplies at the boarding house, but he was not about to risk going back now. Someone wanted him dead, and until he figured out who and why, Lone Pine was the last place he needed to be. The Arizona Territory sun was merciless as Lucas climbed higher into the hills, sweat soaking through his shirt and his throat growing drier with each passing minute. He had been foolish to run this direction without water, but panic had driven him forward. By the time the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Lucas was stumbling more than walking. His vision blurred at the edges, and his tongue felt like leather in his mouth. He barely noticed when the ground beneath his feet changed from rock to softer earth. He did not see the woman watching him from behind a cluster of juniper trees until he collapsed face first onto the ground, consciousness slipping away like sand through his fingers. When Lucas woke, the first thing he noticed was the cool dampness on his lips. Someone was pressing a wet cloth to his mouth, and he sucked at it greedily, desperate for any moisture. His eyes fluttered open to find himself staring up at a woman unlike any he had ever seen. She had long black hair that fell past her shoulders, dark eyes that studied him with a mixture of caution and curiosity, and skin the color of weathered copper. She wore a simple dress made of what looked like deerskin, decorated with small beads in geometric patterns. "Easy," she said softly, though her voice held an accent he could not quite place. She spoke English, but the words came carefully as if she was translating in her mind first. "You drink too fast, you be sick." Lucas tried to sit up, but his head spun and he fell back again. The woman steadied him with one hand on his shoulder, surprisingly strong for her slender frame. He could see now that he was inside some kind of shelter, a wickiup made of wooden poles covered with brush and hides. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the structure, creating patterns of light and shadow on the earthen floor. "Where am I?" Lucas managed to croak out. "Safe," the woman replied. She dipped the cloth into a clay bowl of water and pressed it to his lips again. "For now." Over the next few hours, as Lucas regained his strength, he learned that his rescuer was named Winona Valdez. Her father had been Mexican, her mother Apache, and she lived alone in this small camp in the hills above Lone Pine. Her mother had died 2 winters ago, she explained in her careful English, and her father had been killed by raiders when she was young. She survived by hunting small game, gathering plants and occasionally trading deer hides in the Mexican settlements to the south. "Why you run?" Winona asked as she handed him a piece of dried meat. "Men chase you," Lucas nodded, chewing the tough jerky slowly. Someone started shooting at me in town. I do not know who or why. I am just a ranch hand, nobody important. Winona's dark eyes studied him thoughtfully. Maybe you see something you're not supposed to see. Maybe you hear something. Lucas thought back over the past few days, but could not recall anything unusual. He had been working at the Double R Ranch about 20 miles south of Lone Pine, helping with the spring cattle drive. He had come into town on his day off to get a drink and maybe play some cards, nothing more. The shooting had started the moment he stepped out of the general store with his purchases. "I cannot go back," Lucas said quietly. "Not until I know what is going on." Winona was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "You stay here. Few days. Get strong. Then you go or you stay, your choice." Lucas stayed. At first it was simply because he was too weak to do otherwise, but as the days passed and he regained his strength, he found himself reluctant to leave. Winona fascinated him in ways he could not quite explain. She moved through the world with a quiet confidence, completely at home in the harsh Arizona wilderness that would kill most men in a matter of days. She showed him which plants were safe to eat and which would make him sick, how to track a rabbit by the faint impressions in the dust, how to find water in places that looked bone dry. "You need learn to be quiet," she told him one morning as they crouched behind a boulder, watching a small herd of mule deer grazing in a canyon below. "You walk like a buffalo. Everything hear you coming." Lucas felt his cheeks flush. "I am trying. Try harder." But there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice, and when he glanced at her, he saw the corner of her mouth quirk upward. They did not get the deer that day, but Lucas found he did not mind. He was content simply to be near her, learning her ways, watching how she read the land like other people read books. In the evenings, they would sit by the small fire outside her wickiup, and she would tell him stories her mother had told her, tales of Coyote the trickster and the mountain spirits who protected the Apache people. "Teach me," Lucas said one night after she had finished a story about how Coyote stole fire from the sky. "Teach me your language, the Apache words." Winona looked at him with surprise. "Why you want learn?" "Because it is part of you," Lucas said simply, "and I want to understand you better." Something shifted in Winona's expression then, a softening around her eyes. She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire, then she nodded. "I teach you. But Apache language is hard, many sounds English not have." She started with simple words. Sky was Ya, water was Tu, fire was Ko. Lucas repeated them carefully, trying to match the sounds she made, the way her tongue moved against her teeth. He got most of them wrong at first, and Winona would shake her head and make him try again, patiently correcting his pronunciation. "Dog is Goshk," she said one afternoon as they watched a coyote lope across a distant ridge. "But coyote is Ban. Different animal, different word." Lucas repeated both words, committing them to memory. Each evening, Winona would teach him more, and each morning he would practice what he had learned. Slowly, painfully slowly, he began to build a vocabulary. It was harder than anything he had ever attempted, but he persisted, driven by a growing desire not just to speak her language but to see into her world. Weeks passed. Lucas knew he should leave, should head to another town and find work, but he could not bring himself to go. The mystery of who had shot at him in Lone Pine faded in importance compared to the quiet joy he found in Winona's company. He helped her repair her wickiup when summer storms damaged the covering. He learned to set snares for rabbits and to shoot his rifle without wasting precious ammunition. And every evening they sat by the fire and she taught him more words, more phrases, more of the language her mother had spoken. "How you say thank you?" Lucas asked one night. "Ahehe," Winona replied, "but we say it different than white people, we not say it so much." We show thanks by actions, not just words. Lucas nodded slowly. Then how do I show you thanks for saving my life? Winona smiled, and Lucas felt his heart skip. She had a beautiful smile, rare and precious like water in the desert. You learn my language, you listen to my stories, you help me. That is thanks enough. But Lucas wanted to give her more. He wanted to find the words to express what he was feeling, this strange warmth that spread through his chest whenever she laughed at his clumsy pronunciation or corrected his grammar with patient repetition. He knew what it was, even if he was afraid to name it. "Winona," he said quietly. "How do you say I love you in Apache?" She went very still, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. For a long moment she did not answer, and Lucas thought perhaps he had offended her. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Shil Hajo." Lucas repeated the phrase carefully, trying to get the sounds right. The words felt strange in his mouth, the tones and rhythms so different from English. "Shil Hajo." "Close," Winona said. "But the second word you must make the sound deeper, from here." She touched her throat. Lucas tried again. "Shil Hajo." Winona's eyes had gone very soft. "Better. But you know what it means. You said it means I love you." She shook her head slowly. "Not exactly. It means more like with you I am happy, or you bring me beauty and balance. Love is hard to translate. We think about it different than English." Lucas leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Shil Hajo, Winona." He saw her breath catch, saw the way her fingers tightened on the edge of her deerskin dress. "Lucas," she whispered, "you should not say that if you not mean it." "I mean it," he said, and he realized it was true. Somewhere between learning to track deer and memorizing Apache vocabulary, between fixing her shelter and listening to her stories, he had fallen completely in love with this woman who had saved his life and then taught him how to truly live. "I love you, Winona. Shil Hajo." Winona closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again they were bright with unshed tears. "Shil Hajo, Lucas," she said softly. "I did not think. I did not hope." Lucas reached across the fire and took her hand. Her skin was warm and calloused from hard work, and her fingers curled around his with a strength that made his breath catch. "Why not? Because you are white. Because this world, it does not like when people like us love each other. My father, he faced much hate for loving my mother. They make hard for them, very hard, and now it is worse. The Apache are pushed onto reservations. The white people, they see us as savages, and Mexican people, they trust nobody." Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "I do not care what other people think, I care about you. It is not so simple." "Maybe it is," Lucas said. "Maybe we make it simple. Maybe we just choose each other and damn everyone else." Winona laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and sorrow. "You are foolish, Lucas Donovan, maybe, but I am foolish about you." She stood then, still holding his hand, and pulled him to his feet. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling up into the dark sky. "If we do this," she said quietly, "if we choose this, there is no going back. You understand? We cannot go to Lone Pine. We cannot go to most white towns. We make our life here in these hills, or we go to Mexico maybe, but it will be hard." Lucas pulled her closer until he could smell the scent of sage smoke and sunshine in her hair. "I do not need towns or people. I just need you." Winona looked up at him, and in her dark eyes he saw his whole future reflected back. "Shil Hajo," she whispered again, and then she kissed him. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if she was afraid he might pull away. But Lucas had no intention of pulling away from anything ever again. He wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back with all the longing and love that had been building inside him for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Winona rested her forehead against his chest. "Teach me more," Lucas said quietly. "Teach me everything. I want to speak to you in the language of your mother, the language of your heart." And so she did. In the days and weeks that followed, Winona taught Lucas not just words but whole concepts, ways of thinking about the world that were fundamentally different from anything he had known. She taught him that in Apache, there was no simple future tense because the future was uncertain and unknowable. She taught him that words changed depending on whether you were talking to one person or many, whether the thing you spoke of was close or far, whether it was something you had seen yourself or only heard about. Lucas absorbed it all like the desert earth absorbed rare rain. His accent improved slowly, the sounds becoming more natural in his mouth. And every day, multiple times a day, he told her Shil Hajo. When they woke in the morning with the sun painting the sky pink and gold, when they returned from hunting with rabbits for the pot, when they sat together in the evening and watched the stars emerge one by one from the darkening blue. "You say it too much," Winona teased him one evening, but her eyes were warm with happiness. "You wear the words out." "I will never wear them out," Lucas replied in Apache, the words coming easier now. "I will say them until the day I die, and even then, I will not have said them enough." Summer turned to autumn, and the fierce heat of the Arizona desert gave way to cooler nights and shorter days. Lucas had built them a more permanent shelter, a small cabin made of stones and mud with a proper roof of pine branches. It was crude compared to the houses in town, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Winona showed him how to dry meat for the winter and which roots to gather and store. They worked side by side, preparing for the cold months ahead. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire eating a stew Winona had made from rabbit and wild onions, she reached for his hand. "Lucas, I need to tell you something." He heard the seriousness in her voice and set down his bowl. "What is it?" "I am with child." Lucas stared at her, the words taking a moment to penetrate. Then joy surged through him so powerfully he could barely breathe. "Truly," Winona nodded, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "I am sure, the signs are all there." Lucas let out a whoop of pure happiness and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Shil Hajo," he said fiercely. "Shil Hajo, Winona, you have made me the happiest man alive." But as his initial joy faded, reality set in. They were alone in these hills with winter coming. If something went wrong with the birth, there would be no doctor, no help. Winona seemed to read his thoughts because she touched his cheek gently. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she said softly. "My mother taught me what to do, what herbs to take, how to prepare. We will be fine." "But what if we will be fine?" she repeated, more firmly this time. "You must trust me, Lucas. Trust that I know my own body, my own ways." Lucas nodded, though worry still gnawed at him. "I trust you. But I am allowed to worry. You are my whole world, and you are mine. So we protect each other, yes. We help each other, we face what comes together." "Together," Lucas agreed. As Winona's belly grew round with their child, Lucas found himself saying Shil Hajo even more often, as if the words themselves could keep her safe. He said it when he woke to find her sleeping beside him. He said it when he felt the baby kick beneath his palm. He said it when she smiled at him over the morning fire, or when she corrected his Apache grammar with patient repetition. Winter came to the Arizona high country with surprising ferocity that year. Snow fell in the hills, not the deep drifts of the northern territories, but enough to make hunting difficult and travel treacherous. Lucas kept the fire burning constantly, going out each day to gather more firewood even as the cold bit through his coat and made his fingers numb. He had fashioned snowshoes from bent willow and rabbit hide, copying a design Winona had sketched for him, and they helped him move across the white landscape without sinking to his knees. Winona was large with child now, her movements slower and more careful. Lucas did all the heavy work, insisting she rest and stay warm. She protested at first, proud and independent as always, but eventually she accepted his help with grace. "You are good man," she told him one evening in Apache, the language they spoke more often than English now. "Good husband, good father already." "We are not married," Lucas pointed out. "Not in the eyes of the law or the church." Winona shrugged. "We are married in the eyes of the spirits, in the eyes of the earth and sky. That is what matters. The white man's paper, it means nothing out here." Lucas knew she was right, but part of him wished he could give her more. A real wedding, a real home, a life where she did not have to hide in the hills like an outlaw. But he also knew that the world below, the world of towns and laws and proper society, had no place for them. A white man and an Apache woman, living as husband and wife. They would face nothing but hatred and persecution. Better to make their life here in these wild hills, free and together. The baby came on a cold February night when the wind howled outside their cabin like a living thing. Lucas had been dozing by the fire when Winona's sharp intake of breath woke him. He was on his feet instantly, his heart racing. "It is time," Winona said, her voice tight with pain. "The baby is coming." Lucas felt panic surge through him, but he pushed it down. Winona needed him to be strong now, to be calm. He built up the fire until the cabin was warm and bright, then helped Winona onto the bed of furs and blankets he had prepared for this moment. She had walked him through what to expect, what to do, but now that the time had actually come, his mind felt blank with fear. "Lucas," Winona said, gripping his hand hard as another contraction seized her. "Breathe. You must breathe and be strong for me." Lucas nodded, forcing himself to take slow, steady breaths. "Tell me what to do. Boil water. Get the herbs I prepared, the ones in the clay pot by the door, and the clean cloths." Lucas did as she instructed, moving quickly but carefully. The labor went on for hours. Winona's face sheened with sweat despite the cold, her hands gripping his so hard he thought his bones might break. He murmured to her in Apache, telling her over and over how strong she was, how much he loved her, how soon they would hold their child. "Shilhajo," he said again and again, like a prayer or an incantation. "Shilhajo, my brave one, my beautiful one." Just before dawn, as the wind finally began to die down outside, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that made Lucas's eyes fill with tears. He was perfect, tiny and red and squalling with outrage at the cold air on his skin. Lucas wrapped him carefully in the soft rabbit fur blanket Winona had prepared and placed him in her waiting arms. "A son," Winona whispered, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. "We have a son, Lucas." Lucas knelt beside the bed, one arm around Winona and the other touching his son's impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers curled around his thumb, and Lucas felt something break open inside his chest, a love so vast and overwhelming he could hardly bear it. "What should we name him?" Lucas asked softly. Winona looked down at their son, then up at Lucas. "You choose. You are his father." Lucas thought for a moment. "What is the Apache word for gift?" "Ila." "Then let us call him that, because he is a gift, the most precious gift we could ever receive." But Winona shook her head gently. "We should give him a white name too, for when he must move in that world, he will need both to walk in both places." Lucas understood. Their son would be caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. He would need every advantage they could give him. "Then we call him Ila when we are here in our home, but his white name will be Leon." "Leon Donovan." "Leon," Winona repeated, testing the sound. "Yes, that is good. Leon Ila Donovan." As the sun rose over the snow-covered hills, Lucas sat with his wife and son, and he said the words he would say 10,000 times more before his life was done. Shilhajo. The years that followed were hard but filled with a happiness Lucas had never imagined possible. Little Leon grew strong and healthy, learning to walk on sturdy legs that carried him fearlessly across the rocky ground. He learned both languages simultaneously, switching between English and Apache with the easy fluidity of childhood. Winona taught him the old stories and the old ways, while Lucas taught him to read from the few books he had managed to acquire on rare trading trips to the Mexican settlements. Lucas had stayed away from Lone Pine and the other American towns, still wary of whoever had tried to kill him all those years ago. But occasionally, he would make the long journey south into Mexico, where he could trade the deer hides and beadwork Winona made for supplies they could not get any other way. Flour and coffee, ammunition and cloth, the few precious luxuries that made their isolated life a bit easier. On one such trip, when Leon was 3 years old, Lucas stopped at a cantina in a small village and overheard two men talking. They spoke in English, unusual enough in this part of Mexico that it caught his attention. "Heard they finally caught the men who robbed that payroll wagon outside Lone Pine," one man said. "Back in '78, took them long enough." Lucas felt his blood run cold. "What happened?" he asked, turning to the men. They looked at him with mild curiosity. "Big robbery, 5-6 years back now. Gang of men hit an army payroll wagon, killed 2 soldiers. There was a witness, some ranch hand who saw the whole thing. The gang tried to kill him in town, but he got away. They thought maybe the gang got him later, but turns out he just disappeared." Lucky bastard. Lucas's mind reeled. He had been the witness. He tried to remember that day in Lone Pine, walking out of the general store. He had seen something, he realized now. A group of men near the edge of town, loading something heavy into a wagon. He had not thought anything of it at the time, had barely registered it. But someone must have seen him looking, must have feared he would recognize them or remember too much. "They caught the gang?" Lucas asked carefully. "Yep, got a confession and everything. 2 of them hanged last month, the others are in prison. It is over and done with." Lucas thanked the men and left the cantina, his mind spinning. It was safe now. He could go back to Lone Pine if he wanted, could take Winona and Leon to live in a real town with a real house. But as he rode back toward the hills, back toward his family, he realized he did not want that. The life they had built together was more real than anything he could find in a town. They had their cabin, their land, their love. That was enough. When he reached home, Winona was outside with Leon, teaching him to identify bird calls. Lucas dismounted and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "What is wrong?" she asked, searching his face. "What happened?" "Nothing is wrong," Lucas said, and he meant it. "Everything is exactly right. Shilhajo, Winona. Shilhajo today and every day." She smiled and kissed him softly. "Shilhajo, my husband." Leon grew into a bright, curious boy who seemed to inherit the best of both his parents. He had Lucas's light brown hair and Winona's dark eyes, and a spirit of adventure that sometimes terrified them both. When he was 5, Winona gave birth to a daughter they named Lily, with an Apache name of Desba, meaning goes to war. She was fierce from the moment she drew breath, her cries loud and demanding. Lucas held his daughter and looked at Winona, exhausted but glowing with joy, and he felt his heart expand even further. "How is it possible to love more than I already did?" he asked in Apache. "I thought my heart was full, but it just keeps growing." "Love is like that," Winona replied softly. "It is infinite, endless. The more you give, the more you have to give." 2 years later came another son whom they named Samuel, with the Apache name Ashkiai, meaning boy. Their little cabin in the hills was crowded now, but filled with laughter and love. Lucas had expanded it over the years, adding a second room and a better roof. It would never be fancy, but it was solid and warm and theirs. Every morning, Lucas woke before dawn and watched his family sleep. Winona with her long black hair spread across the pillow, Leon curled on his side with one arm thrown over his face, Lily sprawled like a starfish with her mouth open, little Samuel tucked against his mother's side. And every morning, Lucas whispered the same words he had said thousands of times before, Shilhajo. When Leon was 10, he asked his father why he said those words so often. They were sitting outside in the evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Lucas thought about his answer carefully. "When I first met your mother," he said slowly in English, knowing all the children understood both languages equally, "I was lost. Not just in these hills, though I was that too. I was lost in my life, in my heart. I did not know who I was or what I wanted. Your mother saved me, not just from dying of thirst, but from living a life that meant nothing." Leon listened intently, his young face serious. "She taught me her language," Lucas continued. "And when I learned how to say I love you in Apache, I realized it was the most important thing I would ever say. So I promised myself I would say it every day, as many times as I could, because love is not something you feel once and forget about. It is something you choose every single day over and over again." "Do you ever get tired of saying it?" Leon asked. Lucas shook his head. "Never. Every time I say it, I mean it more than the time before. Shilhajo to your mother, Shilhajo to you and your brother and sister. I will say it until my last breath, and even then it will not be enough." Leon was quiet for a moment, then he said softly in perfect Apache, "Shilhajo, father." Lucas pulled his son close, his throat tight with emotion. "Shilhajo, my boy." The children grew. Leon became a skilled hunter and tracker, moving through the wilderness with his mother's grace and his father's determination. Lily was bold and fearless, climbing trees that made Winona's heart stop and swimming in the creek, even when the water was ice cold. Samuel was the quiet one, thoughtful and gentle, more interested in the plants and herbs his mother gathered than in hunting or adventure. When Leon was 15, he asked if he could ride to one of the towns, see what the wider world was like. Lucas and Winona discussed it long into the night. They knew they could not keep their children isolated forever. The world was changing, slowly but surely. The Apache wars were over, the tribes confined to reservations. Arizona would soon be a state. Their children would have to find their own way through a world that had no clear place for people like them. "We let him go," Winona said finally. "But we teach him first. We teach him to be careful, to trust his instincts, to come home if there is trouble." So Leon made his first trip to Lone Pine, with Lucas riding beside him. The town had grown since Lucas had last seen it, new buildings lining the main street. People stared at them as they rode in, at the man with the sun-weathered face and the boy who was clearly of mixed heritage. But no one bothered them, and Lucas realized that the world, while still far from perfect, had perhaps softened slightly in its harsh edges. They bought supplies and left quickly, but Leon's eyes had been wide with wonder at the sight of so many buildings, so many people. "Is that where you lived before?" he asked as they rode back into the hills. "I worked near there," Lucas replied, "but I never really lived until I met your mother." Leon thought about this, then nodded slowly. "I understand." The boy made more trips as he grew older, sometimes to Lone Pine, sometimes to the Mexican villages in the south. He learned to navigate both worlds, to speak to white men in English and Mexicans in Spanish, though he always came home to the hills and spoke Apache with his mother and siblings. Lily followed her brother's example when she was old enough, though she was more confrontational than Leon, more willing to stand up to prejudice and ignorance. She got into a fight once with a boy who called her a half-breed and came home with a black eye and a satisfied smile. Lucas tried to scold her, but Winona just shook her head. "She has my mother's spirit," Winona said. "You cannot tame that, and you should not try. The world will try hard enough to break her. We must make sure she is strong enough to bend without breaking." Samuel showed no interest in the towns or the outside world. He was happy in the hills, learning about plants and medicine from his mother, helping his father tend the small garden they had started. He was gentle with animals and patient with people, and Lucas thought he might become a healer someday, someone who could help others with his knowledge and compassion. As the children grew toward adulthood, Lucas and Winona found themselves with more time alone together. They would sit in the evenings as they had in those early days, talking and watching the stars. Lucas's hair had gone gray at the temples, and Winona had lines at the corners of her eyes, but when she smiled at him, he saw the same woman who had saved his life all those years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked her one night, speaking in Apache as they always did when they were alone. "Choosing this life, choosing me," Winona looked at him in surprise. "Never, not for one moment. Why would you ask this?" "Because you gave up so much. You could have found someone else, someone from your own people. You could have had an easier life." Winona reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I could have had many things," she said softly, "but I wanted you. I wanted this life, this family. I wanted to wake up every morning and hear you say Shilhajo like it is the first time, like the words are brand new. I wanted to grow old with you here in these hills, free and together. That is not a sacrifice, Lucas. That is a gift." Lucas lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Shilhajo, my wife. My heart, my home, my everything. Shilhajo, my husband." Time moved forward as it always does. Leon met a girl in one of the Mexican villages, a sweet-faced young woman named Rosa who did not care that his mother was Apache or that he lived in the hills. They married in a small ceremony with just the family present, and Lucas performed the service himself, mixing English and Apache and a bit of Spanish to make it complete. Watching his son exchange vows, Lucas found himself thinking back to his own beginning with Winona, how far they had come together. Lily surprised them all by falling in love with a young Apache man she met on a trip to the reservation. His name was Taklisham, and he was a teacher at the reservation school, trying to help his people preserve their language and culture, even as the government tried to stamp it out. Lily married him and went to live on the reservation, promising to visit often. Lucas worried about her, but Winona told him to have faith. "She is strong," Winona said, "and she loves him. That is what matters." Samuel, true to Lucas's prediction, became a healer. He learned everything Winona could teach him, and then began studying with an old Mexican curandero in one of the southern villages. He never married, seemingly content with his plants and his medicines and his quiet life. The years rolled on. Lucas and Winona became grandparents multiple times over. Leon and Rosa had 3 children. Lily and Taklisham had 2. And the little cabin in the hills was always full of noise and life when they all came to visit. Lucas would sit with Winona and watch their grandchildren play, and he would feel such overwhelming gratitude that sometimes it brought tears to his eyes. "You are getting soft in your old age," Winona teased him once, seeing his tears. "I have always been soft when it comes to you," Lucas replied. "Shilhajo, grandmother," Winona laughed. "Shilhajo, grandfather." When Lucas was 65 and Winona 62, they took a trip back to Lone Pine together. It had been years since either of them had been to the town, and they were curious to see how it had changed. Arizona had become a state, though that mattered little in their daily lives. The town was larger now, with a railroad station and a proper hotel. People still stared at them, at the old white man and the Apache woman walking hand in hand down the main street, but the stares were more curious than hostile. They bought supplies and were preparing to leave when a man approached them. He was old like Lucas, with white hair and a weathered face. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Lucas Donovan?" Lucas tensed, old instincts coming back. "Who is asking? My name is Robert Pearson. I used to be the sheriff here back in the 70s. I always wondered what happened to you after that shooting in 78. Lucas studied the old man carefully. "You know about that? I was the one who investigated it. Found out it was the Clanton gang trying to silence you because you saw them loading that stolen payroll. By the time we figured it out, you had vanished. Some folks thought they had killed you and hidden the body, but I always hoped you just got smart and left town." "I did," Lucas said simply, "and I never came back." Pearson nodded slowly, his eyes moving to Winona and then back to Lucas. "Well, I am glad you are alive. And it looks like you have done all right for yourself." "Better than all right," Lucas said, pulling Winona closer. "I found everything I ever needed. They left Lone Pine that day and never went back. There was nothing there for them, no connection to the life they had built. Their home was in the hills with their children and grandchildren, with the land they knew and loved. As they grew older, Lucas and Winona slowed down. Their children worried about them, tried to convince them to move closer to town, but they refused. "We will die where we lived," Winona said firmly. "Together in our home." Lucas still said "Shil Hajo" every day, multiple times a day, when they woke in the morning, when they ate their meals, when they sat outside in the evening and watched the sunset. The words had become as natural to him as breathing, a constant reminder of the love that had sustained them through decades of joy and hardship. "You have said it so many times," Winona said to him one evening. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies worn but their love as strong as ever. Tens of thousands of times, maybe more. Hundreds of thousands, probably, Lucas replied in Apache, the language he spoke more fluently than English now. "And I will say it hundreds of thousands more. You are a stubborn man, Lucas Donovan. Only about the things that matter most." One winter morning when Lucas was 78 and Winona 75, he woke to find her still sleeping beside him. The sun was well up, which was unusual. Winona always rose before dawn. Lucas reached out to wake her gently, then froze. Her skin was cold beneath his fingers. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no," but he knew. Somewhere in the night while he slept beside her, Winona had slipped away. Her face was peaceful, relaxed in a way it never was in waking life. She looked almost young again, and Lucas could see the woman who had saved him all those years ago, who had taught him her language and her ways, who had loved him through all the years of their life together. Lucas gathered her into his arms, holding her close, and he said the words one more time. "Shil Hajo, my wife. Shil Hajo, my heart. Shil Hajo." The children came when he sent word. They buried Winona on the hillside above their cabin, in a spot where she could see the sunrise. Leon spoke the prayers in Apache, and Lily sang the songs their mother had taught them. Samuel scattered the sacred herbs. Lucas stood silent, his eyes dry, his heart too full of grief for tears. After the funeral, the children tried to convince Lucas to come live with one of them. He was too old to live alone in the hills, they said. He needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere he could be cared for, but Lucas refused. "This is my home," he said quietly. "This is where your mother and I built our life. This is where I will stay until I join her." They argued, but Lucas was as stubborn as Lily had ever been. Finally, they compromised. Samuel would stay with him, at least for a while, to make sure he was all right. The others would visit often. Lucas agreed to this, though he knew it would not be for long. Without Winona, the days felt empty and colorless. Lucas went through the motions of living, eating the meals Samuel prepared, sitting by the fire in the evenings. But there was no joy in it, no purpose. He climbed the hill to Winona's grave every day, and there he would sit and talk to her in Apache, telling her about his day, about the children and grandchildren, about how much he missed her. "Shil Hajo," he said to the quiet grave. "Shil Hajo, my beautiful wife. I will say it until I see you again." 6 months after Winona died, on a warm summer evening, Lucas climbed the hill to her grave as he did every day. He sat down beside the simple marker Leon had carved, and he looked out over the hills they had called home for more than 40 years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those impossible colors he had never tired of seeing. "I will be with you soon," Lucas said softly in Apache. "I feel it, my love. My time here is almost done." He lay down beside her grave, his old bones aching but his heart at peace. The sky above him was vast and beautiful, the stars beginning to emerge one by one. Lucas closed his eyes and said the words one final time, putting all his love, all his longing, all his faith into them. "Shil Hajo, Winona, Shil Hajo, forever and always." Samuel found him the next morning, lying beside his mother's grave, a peaceful smile on his weathered face. They buried him next to Winona, their graves side by side on the hillside, looking out over the land they had loved. The children and grandchildren kept coming to visit the graves, bringing flowers in summer and saying prayers in winter. Leon taught his children the Apache words his mother had taught him, making sure the language lived on. Lily fought to preserve Apache culture and history, becoming a voice for her mother's people. Samuel continued his healing work, helping anyone who needed it, regardless of their heritage. And on the hillside, the two graves stood side by side, silent witnesses to a love that had transcended barriers of culture and prejudice, a love that had endured through hardship and joy, a love that had been spoken aloud every single day in the beautiful, complex words of a language Lucas Donovan had learned for one reason only: to tell Winona Valdez how much he loved her. The wind whispered through the hills, carrying the echoes of words spoken thousands upon thousands of times, words that had meant "with you I am happy," words that had meant "you bring me beauty and balance," words that had meant, simply and profoundly, "I love you." Shil Hajo. The words lived on in the stories the grandchildren told their own children, in the memories of a love that had been pure and true and absolutely unshakable. Lucas and Winona had chosen each other against all odds, had built a life together in the wild hills of Arizona Territory, and had proven that love, when spoken aloud every day, when honored and cherished and protected, could endure anything the world threw at it. Their cabin stood for many years after they were gone, slowly falling back into the earth from which it had been built. But the hillside where they lay remained a place of pilgrimage for their descendants, a reminder of where they came from and what they were capable of. The family gatherings held there every year grew larger as the generations multiplied, mixing Apache and Mexican and white bloodlines into something new and beautiful. On the 100th anniversary of Lucas and Winona's first meeting, the family gathered on that hillside. There were dozens of them now, great-great-grandchildren who had never met the couple but who knew their story by heart. Leon's grandson, a teacher like his great-uncle Tacklesham, stood before the graves and spoke. "Our great-great-grandfather Lucas Donovan came to these hills running from death," he said in English, then repeated in Apache, then in Spanish. "Our great-great-grandmother Winona Valdez saved his life, but more than that, she taught him how to truly live. She taught him her language, the language of her mother's people, the language that was forbidden by law when they were young. And he learned it not because he had to, but because he wanted to speak to her heart in the language of her heart. The family listened, the children fidgeting in the heat, the elders nodding with memory and recognition. He learned to say, "I love you" in Apache, the young man continued. And once he learned it, he never stopped saying it. Every day, many times a day, for more than 50 years, he told her Shil Hajo, and she said it back to him, and they built a love that created all of us. We are here because they chose love over fear, because they chose each other over the prejudice and hatred of their time, because they chose to speak their truth aloud every single day. He paused, looking out over the assembled family, seeing Apache features and Mexican features and white features, all mixed and blended into something uniquely theirs. So today, we honor them, and we remember that love is not a feeling you have once and forget. Love is a choice you make every day. Love is something you speak aloud, over and over, until the words become part of your soul. The family stood then, all together, and spoke in unison the words Lucas had said so many times. Shil Hajo. The words echoed across the hillside, across the valley, across the years and the generations. And if the wind carried them just right, perhaps somewhere Lucas and Winona heard them too and smiled and said them back. Shil Hajo. Forever and always.